Oh, there we go. So the amendments to the zoning bylaws can be grouped into three categories. The first, correcting pilot area mapping for errors in zoning bylaw 7626. Updating the pilot project area bylaw schedules in zoning bylaws number 7626 and 3274. Oh. There we go. And administrative amendments to zoning bylaws number 7626 and, oh, sorry. Give me 1 second. I apologize for that delay. So as well, administrative amendments to zoning bylaws number 7626 and 3274. So correcting the pilot project area mapping error in zoning bylaw number 7626. The hatched area on the map indicates the rural areas south of the 401 that surround the Westbrook area. The area was mistakenly added to Schedule D of zoning bylaw 7626 with no holding symbol. The proposed amendment seeks to change the rural area within Section D to requiring a holding symbol removal prior to the approval of secondary residential units. Updating the pilot project area in zoning bylaw number 7626, the solid area on the map indicates the urban area within the Westbrook neighborhood. Due to servicing constraints within Westbrook urban area, the amendment seeks to remove the Westbrook urban area from Schedule D, secondary suites pilot area. Updating the pilot project area in zoning bylaw number 3274. The solid area on the map indicates the urban area of Kingston East that the proposed amendment seeks to add to Schedule C of zoning bylaw number 3274, permitting secondary suites as of right. The exception to this area is the urban area north of Gore Road and west of Highway 15, which is being excluded due to servicing constraints. The hatched area represents the rural area of Kingston East that is proposed to be added to the Schedule D, permitting secondary residential units subject to the removal of a holding symbol. The administrative amendments to bylaw 7626 seeks to add Schedule D in Section 3, which identifies schedules to the bylaw. The administrative amendment to bylaw 3274 seeks to delete Section 5.3b of zoning bylaw number 3274, which prohibits residential units in basements located more than 1 meter below grade. Previously, the prohibition of residential units in cellars was removed from this bylaw. This amendment is a continuation of that policy. The administrative amendments to bylaw 3274 also seeks to harmonize the definitions of principal residential units found in zoning bylaw 3274 with the definition found in bylaws number 7626 and 97102, which will read as follows. Principal residential unit means the principal use of an existing building or structure intended for human habitation and occupying the majority of gross area of said building or structure. The public meeting was advertised in the Whig Standard through an ad as per the requirements for public notification of the Planning Act. A courtesy ad was also placed in the Kingston Whig Standard. To date, approximately 50 pieces of correspondence have been received with respect to the application. The amendments will harmonize and clarify the zoning bylaws with respect to secondary suite provisions. As well, the amendments will expand permission for secondary suites where they can be accommodated with respect to servicing.
Thank you. Normally, this is where I would ask staff for comments, but I think we got that list. Thank you. I'd like to open to the committee for questions. No? And now, if there are members of the public who would like to speak, we have microphones on this side, and there's one just over here. If you'd like to come and give your name and address and any comments, we'd like to keep everything to 5 minutes per person or less. Are there any people who wish to speak to this one? Yes, sir, please. And if you can push the button so the red light comes on. There we go.
Okay. My name is Stan Barnes, and I live in Westbrook Meadows. I'm speaking on behalf of the Westbrook Meadows Residents Association, which is supported by the vast majority of residents. We are in full support of the changes proposed in Report PC 15-102, file number D14-133-2015. We take exception to assertions made in a letter from the law firm Smith, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Valerote, representing the group known as Concept. The Concept Group owned 4 completed duplex-style rental buildings in Westbrook Meadows and are currently building on 4 other lots. The letter that we are referring to is on public record in Schedule A. In that letter, Concept states that a group of local residents is aggressively pushing for removal of secondary suites. This statement is patently false. We are in full support of the secondary suite program initiatives and have consistently put forth that message, which is also available in the public record. Also in that letter, they suggest a compromise to obtain secondary suite permits for Concept's current construction project. The amendment being deliberated this evening was public knowledge and communicated to Alair Concept before they broke ground on their second phase of buildings. Concept chose to begin construction anyway. Any and all residents will be obliged to adhere to whatever the city's decision is, with no special considerations. And in another instance, there have already been 2 sewer backups in houses in our area. On behalf of the 200+ residents of Westbrook Meadows who have signed a petition, I thank you for your time in working through what I know this is a very complex issue. Thank you. And I'll have to give you a copy.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll get you.
Are there any other members of the public who wish to comment? Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Thompson. I'm from the law firm Smith Valeria, the author of the letter just referred to. We represent the Concept Group. It's made up of Concept Young Inc. and Concept Property Group Inc. Both of those entities have signed in on the form, and you have their contact particulars on those forms. The Concept Property Group owns 8 properties within the Westbrook community. 4 have been developed and are occupied with legal secondary units. Another 4 have been purchased and are awaiting issuance of building permits. All of these units currently enjoy the ability under the current zoning to have secondary units as of right. Our clients purchased these lots from the subdivider with the express intention to develop each secondary unit and to retain ownership of each lot for rental purposes. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment would remove as of right zoning within the settlement area boundary in the Westbrook neighborhood. Because such an amendment would substantially impact our client's business model, they have sought professional advice in closely scrutinizing the planning justification for the proposed amendment. Both our firm and the land use planners retained by Concept Group have inquired with the city and have undertaken our own preliminary analysis of the planning rationale that purports to justify this amendment. Quite simply, there appears to be a void of legitimate planning reasons to support this amendment, specifically the removal of as-of-right secondary use permissions for the Westbrook neighborhood. To be clear, we support the majority of this proposed amendment. Expanding the pilot project area to accommodate secondary units is a laudable goal. But for the reasons that follow, we specifically and strongly oppose any amendments to the current zoning that would remove as-of-right secondary units within the urban area in Westbrook. Just referring to the planning report that's been prepared for tonight, 15-102, If you look at page 4, it speaks to the purported rationale behind this removal of as-of-right servicing. And it specifically says, a review of servicing capacity within the Westbrook area has identified that Westbrook is at or near to reaching its municipal service capacity, including committed servicing capacity. As a result of this analysis, it is proposed that Westbrook be removed from the lands that permit second residential units as of right. That's it. That's the only mention of servicing capacity. There's no supporting analysis, no tables, charts, flow levels, average usage, peak usage, anything. Simply indicates that there's been an analysis done and apparently there are servicing issues. If there was an actual analysis done, why is this supporting information not provided in the staff report? If it's forthcoming, why is a public meeting being held to debate in the absence of this information? I'll note that in the previous planning report, there was an update done in November of 2014 that's appended to the report that's before the committee tonight. That was a 2-year update on the status of the pilot project. And you'll see in that report, there were no servicing issues identified in the Westbrook neighborhood. So in just under 2 years of the pilot project being in force, 29 building permit applications were received and 2 site-specific zoning bylaw amendment applications had been received. And the update report in November of 2014, just 9 months ago, indicates that to date, the city's secondary suites initiative has not resulted in any notable concerns related to the integrity or capacity of the public infrastructure system. It also notes further down on the page that at this point in time, the experience in Kingston is consistent with other communities surveyed that have implemented similar projects, similar policies, which include a mix of initial strong opposition and some support, giving way to more moderate opinions as time goes by and neighborhoods become more comfortable with the modest number of units that are created. So as recently as November of last year, everything was going well. There were negligible impacts on servicing, and there was some opposition by citizens consistent with uptake in comparable municipalities. What's changed in 9 months? As far as I can tell, in the absence of any tangible engineering or servicing analysis before this committee, we appear to have a zoning bylaw that has been brought forth to appease a very local and organized group of homeowners within the Westbrook neighborhood who simply don't like renters. You've heard comments tonight from a member of the Westbrook Residents Association who voiced those very concerns tonight. This committee is well aware that we cannot people zone. We cannot use tenure as a rationale for making land use planning decisions. If there are legitimate servicing constraints, let's have that information before this committee and let's debate it. I'd just like to point out finally, before I turn it over to my friend beside me, that back in 2012, the city hired Foten Consultants to conduct a research report into the secondary units, into secondary residential units prior to the pilot project being initiated. And their report was contained in staff report 12-30. I don't have a copy with me at this time, but this committee will be well aware of that report. This report specifically looked at potential servicing impacts of secondary units and concluded that of the municipalities contacted that have implemented approaches to permit secondary residential units, service capacity was considered to be a non-issue, primarily as a result of the following. 1, the average population per dwelling unit has been decreasing for some time, and the addition of new residents to in a secondary suite often returns the number of individuals residing in the house to the number of individuals the dwelling was designed to accommodate. 2, there's numerous illegal second residential units in established neighborhoods, and the legalization of second units does not necessarily lead to the development of additional units above and beyond what already exists. And finally, adding a secondary suite does not mean doubling the number of people in the dwelling. Typically, a second unit maintains approximately the same number of individuals divided amongst 2 units. I'm now going to turn things over to Hugh Handy, who is a land use planner and has some comments as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, staff, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hugh Handy, and I'm a land use planner, professional land use planner with GSP Group, Inc. And we have, as Mr. Thompson has indicated, we've been retained to review the zoning bylaw amendment before you this evening. In large part, in terms of provincial policy, as your planner has indicated, the provincial policy looks to encourage a range and mix of housing and densities, and all forms of residential intensification are encouraged. And that's balanced in provincial policy against ensuring that there are adequate community services and municipal services, as is part of the debate about the Westbrook area. The Kingston official plan, which this is under in terms of the direction on secondary residential units, is clear and concise and has been incorporated to follow along with provincial policy in those initiatives. It encourages the development of secondary units and has criteria to ensure that those units are developed in a reasonable manner. As Mr. Thompson indicated in November 2014 in your staff report, the uptake of approximately 20 units per year is a good response, obviously. It's satisfying a need in the community, but minimal in terms of overall impact. It's gaining momentum. The persons per unit in Canada, so the number of people living in an average dwelling, continues to decline across the country, in Ontario and in Kingston, as we age and society ages. The declining number of 5 or more persons in a household, and there's more increasing in terms of one-person households. Whether it is 2 units or a single detached home, the intensity of use, in my opinion, is similar both from a land use planning perspective and a servicing perspective. You can have large households, many washrooms, and in that respect, it's a similar impact. Our client owns units, as you've heard, in the Westbrook area, and have generally 1 or 2 occupants within those dwellings. So in many cases, the number of people in a house would be similar to those of a single detached home. They're building across Canada in a number of communities, 10 other communities in Ontario, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC. And in that respect, they do see a market. They have been impressed by Kingston and the working with staff through, and have been very cooperative. And I'll turn it back over to Kevin to conclude.
Thank you. So just to conclude, you've heard from Mr. Handy on the planning rationale for expanding, not constricting, secondary suite permissions. You've also have various planning reports prepared for this committee and prepared for the committee in 2014, 13, and 12, which identified no service and capacity issues for the Westbrook neighborhood. We still have no service and capacity issues identified in before this committee. So we'd respectfully request that the proposed amendment be modified to maintain as of right secondary suites in the Westbrook neighborhood within the urban area boundary. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak to this? Yes, Mr. Dixon?
So, Frank Dixon, 495 Alfred, Apartment 2, K7K 4J4. Madam Chair, members of the committee, city staff, proponents, citizens, and media. I've been following the issue in the newspaper and on broadcasts, and just speaking as a concerned citizen. Could city engineering professionals quantify more precisely the limitations which media coverage has been describing for the past several weeks? Is there also an issue pertaining to absentee ownership, as has been described in media reports? And is there other ongoing development taking place in the Westbrook area which could also be impacting the situation? Please quantify. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Gotsis will be responding to all of these comments and questions. Are there other, would you like to speak, Mr. Sir, if you'd like to come to this microphone?
Good evening, Madam Chair. My name is Christian Smith. I'm a resident of Westbrook Meadows as of about a month ago, 900 Roshan Drive in Westbrook. Prior to that, I rented for a year, and prior to that, I owned a home, and prior to that, I rented. I like renters. I have no problem with renters. I think that there's a place for that, and I take exception to the comment of the lawyer representing Concept Homes made a few minutes ago. The comment or the petition, if you will, that's been signed by some 200 plus residents of Kingston represents, I think, a balanced point of view. And to the point of the gentleman who is now my neighbor, doesn't represent a dislike of renters. I want to point out that Concept Homes is, I believe, based in Alberta and has no resident in Kingston. It doesn't have an interest in the health of Kingston going forward. It only has, to the point of their lawyer, a business interest here. So I want to wonder if their point of view is maybe a little bit twisted to their own benefit, not necessarily to the benefit of people of Kingston. And to this gentleman's point, if an engineer or if the services providers in Kingston, utilities, Kingston have, or planning have demonstrated or asserted that there isn't capacity, I believe there's a basis for that, and I believe there's a place for them to provide that basis, but we should respect what they assert and not tie up resources in going back and forth and fighting that out. So I think we should look for some validation for that, but we should respect it as it's asserted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, if you'd like to come to the microphone.
Jennifer Guerra, Foten Consultants. We're located at 6 Cataraqui Street, Suite 108. Foten was retained by Creekside Valley Developments to review and comment on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. We prepared and submitted a letter to staff which outlines some of our concerns related to removing Westbrook from the area that's permitted to have secondary suites as of right. And our main concern, which has been voiced already, is surrounding the legitimacy of the claim that there's currently insufficient servicing capacity to support secondary suites in particular in Westbrook. As mentioned already, Foten in 2011 was engaged by the City of Kingston to provide recommendations for official plan policies and zoning regulations to direct the development of secondary suites in the former Kingston Township. And one thing that this study did look at was servicing considerations, and what it did find was that secondary suites generally don't place an extra burden on municipal infrastructure and servicing beyond the original design capacity. And the main reason for this is because typically those seeking to establish secondary suites are more often smaller household sizes in the first place. So quite often they're seniors or they're couples, young professionals, and similarly those occupying the actual secondary suite is also of a smaller household size. We have consulted an engineering consultant whose opinion today is that the increase in servicing capacity required for secondary suites is minor in Westbrook and should be considered negligible. Given all this, we feel it's critical at this time in the process to involve greater consultation with Westbrook's larger property owners, developers, engineering consultants, in order to develop a more open and complete understanding of what the servicing constraints are in Westbrook, and that this should occur before Council considers a decision on this application.
Thank you very much. Other comments or questions? Yes, sir.
My name is Robert Martin Schlosser. I reside at 843 Kananaskis Drive. Madam Chair, members of the committee, friends, neighbors. I was quite surprised listening to an assumption, I believe it was an assumption made by the lawyer who spoke with regards to the number of people that would be in the units under concern. From my personal observation, most of the residents that are in the units, you'll either find 2 or 3 people, adults. And the capacity of the units, most of them are 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom units. So you can have, more than 1 person and 2 people in the other units. So I think that we have to take that with a grain of salt. What we should do is take a look at the capacity in terms of the number of toilets, number of sinks, and such that are generating water within the property, to go and make an assessment as to whether the capacity or whether that unit is determining how much quantity is actually being output into the sewer system. I think it's fair to go and say that every one of us, or most of us, have been a tenant at one time or another. When you're starting out, you don't have the financial resources to go and live in a large home. So I think logically people are going to be for the idea of a secondary suite. The concept sounds it seems great. But in essence, if you have just a duplex, then it's not a secondary suite. You're not providing residual capacity in essence, because the cost of the units is quite high. We don't have bus service in the Westbrook area. So are you going to have somebody who's not that financially advantaged being able to go and live in the area? It doesn't seem to make sense to me. Notwithstanding, I think the issue of the capacity of the infrastructure, if it's been stated as being marginal at this time, and it obviously must be because we've got a plan to go and upgrade the system later on next year. So I think we should just hold to logic and just withhold allowing expansion and demand being placed on our system beyond that which we can afford, really. There have been, as stated by a former resident, by Stan, he had stated that there'd been 2 cases of sewer backup in our area. Well, to my way of thinking, that's a fact. And if there has been a problem there, as soon as you add more water into a system that's pretty marginal at this point, as demonstrated by actual backups in the area, it would appear to me to be logical to go and just hold things, and let's do the assessment. Let's get the system upgraded, and then we'll be able to be in a better position to go and safely provide servicing to the area. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Would anyone else wish to comment? Seeing no one else, I'd like to ask the committee if they have any questions. Councillor Neal?
Yes, I have just 4 quick questions to a variety of people. So, am I right?
I just realized, I wonder if Mr. Gutz's reply might clear up some of your questions that have probably been prompted.
That's fine. If you want to come back to me
Would you
after,
like to
that's fine.
comment on some of the questions and.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think there was comments previously with respect to the servicing capacity and documentation. We have indicated that we will be providing that information to the parties that have requested it. As far as the other questions with respect to capacity, they will all be addressed in the comprehensive report to Planning Committee.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I just would like to add, because there was, I believe, a question about a report in the media. We are not here to comment on what the media decides to print or publishes, so we're not going to provide any comment on that. The information that we have in front of you is based on planning justification and not on media comments.
Thank you for that. Okay, Councillor Neal.
Thank you. I represent a kind of core area of the city where there are some, because of capacity issues, some areas that do have by right and some areas that don't. And that the areas that don't, as I understand it, that don't have by right can indeed come and request a site-specific zoning to answer any of the questions regarding capacity. That's my understanding. If you wish to comment on it, I do see that Utilities Kingston engineer is here with us, and I look forward to the report that's coming out. But if he wanted to just explain very briefly what the capacity issues are and what the timeline for addressing some of those are. And I know that the petition, in my mind, had the unfortunate clause that secondary suites should only be allowed if they were owner-occupied buildings, and it's my understanding that that would be a slam dunk for a OMB appeal or a court challenge, because that would be in defiance of the Ontario Human Rights Code. And am I right in assuming all of this is OMB appealable? I think that's a rhetorical question, but if people could address that.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. To the first point, yes, if the property does not have as-of-right secondary suites, an application can be made for a zoning bylaw amendment. At that time, one of the things that would be reviewed is servicing capacity. To the third point, yes, we can't people zone. It is against the Ontario Human Rights Code. And I think the final point with respect to capacity, I'll leave to Mr. Miller.
Mr. Miller?
Yes, thank you. To your question, the issue at Westbrook and the servicing issues associated with it have to deal with the pumping station that's located in Westbrook and the capacity that has been reached with respect to that station. We currently have in our 2015 capital program, which was approved by council, funds in the budget to undertake improvements to that facility. Those improvements are being looked at right now, are expected to start sometime late fall, early winter of this year, will continue into the new year. We, at this point, sort of barring any unforeseen circumstances, would expect the work to be completed late spring, sometime in the summer of 2016, in which case the capacity questions would resolve themselves.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
Sorry, go ahead. Thank you.
Director Page.
Through you, Madam Chair, just a couple of additional points of clarification. So similar to what Mr. Ghostis has offered, what we're looking at is not restricting secondary suites, period, from that area, but because of the servicing capacity issues that have been identified, asking applicants to go through an additional test, and that's done through the rezoning process. So applicants could still come forward and ask for a site-specific zoning, similar to what we have established in other areas of the city. And the difference between that and as of right is when we look at something from a site-specific zoning perspective, there's additional technical review that's undertaken by all of the different internal departments, mostly also including the building department. When something's allowed as of right, an applicant can come to the building counter and ask for a permit, and there's not the same level of rigor that goes into reviewing the capacity issues. So we're looking at providing that as an additional test to ensure that we have the confidence behind the servicing capacity. In terms of Councillor Neal's question about appeal rights, secondary suites under Section 3419 of the Planning Act actually do not have appeal rights. So that's something in terms of a clarification of note.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Councillor Turner?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. One of the constituents mentioned when he spoke about how did they name it secondary suites? How did the builder name it? Does anyone know? How did it get away with being secondary suites if the premise is that someone lives above in the top unit with 2 people, or 2 bedrooms, and the bottom unit is rented by the people that live above? How did the builder build it as a secondary suite?
Through you, Madam Chair, the units that were built complied with the building code. With respect to the size, secondary suites are differentiated from duplex units in that a duplex unit would have 50% of the building would be occupied by one unit, 50% by the other. A secondary suite, 40% of the unit is occupied by the secondary residential unit, where the primary residential unit occupies a greater floor area. So that's principally how you distinguish a secondary suite in terms of zoning from other types of units. Where that second residential unit is located within the building isn't regulated within zoning. So we don't say that that unit has to occur in the basement or the cellar or the first floor. It can be anywhere within the structure.
Okay, thank you. But what about the person living in it being a secondary suite? It doesn't matter. There's no law on that or ruling or anything.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. We can't look at tenure or who lives within the structure. All we can look at is the actual land use itself.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, I will close this public meeting to do with secondary suites and move on to our next public meeting. And thank you, Mr. Gotsis, very much. Application for zoning bylaw amendment 1233 Midland Avenue. And I see our presenter is here.
Well, good evening, Madam Chair, members of committee, members of the public and staff. My name is Ryan Gooder, and I'm going to be conducting a brief presentation. I'm a planning consultant from Weston Consulting on behalf of the owners and proponents. This matter has been before Planning Committee once before some time ago. We are back, and we are back with some new ideas and want to present them to you. In terms of context, this land is immediately on the corner of Catwoods Drive and Midland, northwest corner. It's a bit of a shot. There's a residential to the west. This is part of an arterial commercial designation that's been entrenched in the official plan for some time. That designation does provide the opportunity for, I would say, primarily commercial uses. That was his intention. It does provide the opportunity for some residential uses if it's demonstrated they're compatible. In terms of zoning, this is presently zoned development, and what I would point out for context is the adjoining zones in the area contemplate a variety of site-specific commercial zones as well as residential zones to the immediate west. Process-wise, we were before you ultimately, I guess, public meeting formally in June of 2014. We subsequently, based on the feedback received, had an informal councillor-led public meeting at the center to gauge additional feedback and work through some technical issues and feedback through that. That was in July, the month following the public meeting. We've since gone through a series of revisions to the application, And ultimately, one of the key changes is we've actually broken this into phases, and we're contemplating a second phase, which I want to describe in more detail. And there's been some minor adjustments to phase one, but similar uses are still contemplated for that. And I would also make note of, we have submitted for a tree removal permit as well, by way of interest, and done a full response submission for which we've received some comments that we're working through. This is the original site plan configuration. It was intended to be exclusively of an arterial commercial form and function, and it had a number of buildings, and this is an expression of that. We've now changed the approach quite a bit, and you'll notice that the western portion, Building E at the bottom left on Catwoods Drive, has been reduced in size and reconfigured the balance of the site fronting onto Midland. We basically have an arterial commercial portion along Midland, interfacing then to a future phase, which we have presently identified two different options for that, which I'll describe in a moment. But what's important is we've reduced the overall number of buildings, and we've actually secured, there's now a second tenant that has been secured, which is a Jiffy Lube auto repair facility, Building C, in the center of the plan. We have modified the noise analysis. All of the traffic analysis has been updated, and I'll speak to that in a moment. The other important thing that I'll note is we've incorporated a bus shelter that's been identified on, it's very small, you can't see it, but it's on the Catwoods Drive frontage immediately to the west of the access to Catwoods Drive. Ultimately, I wanted to respond briefly to some of the matters that were raised by the public and by staff. Fundamentally, there was concern about noise and impacts related to the interface between commercial and residential. We have a noise study that was done, and it was subsequently updated based on this concept. But what's important to note is that there's a pretty significant separation now as a result of the phasing that I think is an overall improvement, and that is important. We've also modified the extent of noise barriers on the west side of Building E. Another issue that was raised was that of compatibility and the appropriateness of the uses, and how does that fit into a neighborhood context. This area is ultimately an interface between an employment area and a residential community, and is serving the benefit of that interface. It's not an easy exercise, but we've tried to accommodate that by building separation, landscape treatments, and such. The other thing that's important is the nature of the uses have been reduced to very specific and controlled floor areas, and the nature of the uses themselves we've worked through with planning staff. The other and probably most significant comment that was raised was that of the traffic impacts. And I can tell you that our consultant, along with other support from city staff and through additional analysis, has now taken into account all of the improvements that have, some of which have actually been instituted since we were here over a year ago. And that includes speed humps that have been introduced along Catwoods Drive, which I understand from some of the resident comments have slowed the traffic in the area. And also there's been signal timing improvements that have been made, part of which was asked of by our traffic consultant. Those are now in place. And furthermore, the Bay Ridge Drive extension was also fed into the traffic analysis. The net effect of those changes have dramatically improved the outlook and the analysis as part of the traffic issues that were raised. So very quickly, I just wanted to highlight the importance of this is the majority of the phase one lands are substantially the same as what was presented over a year ago. What you'll notice is the area highlighted in red is a potential second phase. It's not initially part of what we're seeking for site plan approval, but the intent is that we would be zoning the lands that would provide for a mixed zoning, both facilitating commercial and facilitating a residential component, which I'll describe in a moment. This scenario is less than what was originally contemplated, and it's purely conceptual. And ultimately, this is the configuration. It's integrated with our revised phase one. This is just an artist's rendering of some of the imagery that would form part of those Phase 2 lands. And this material is just, again, conceptual, illustrating the nature of the form. These are one-story buildings that would interface with the adjoining residential. Ultimately, the second option, which we've discussed, and again, the intent of this is to bring forward a mixed use. It's representative of an infill type of project. And what you'll see here is we've envisioned a residential development in the Phase 2 lands, that of townhouse format. And that's not to say we've been precise in delineating the widths of those units, but it reflects the transition probably appropriately to the west. What we've, again, artist rendering of the nature of that, and what we have ultimately done, I think, is respond very well to the members of the public concerns that were raised. And I'm here this evening to answer and address any comments of the committee and of the public. And I see some familiar faces in the gallery in terms of folks that I have connected with. And again, appreciate the opportunity to answer any questions that the committee may have. So thank you.
Thank you. And could we hear from staff, please?
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, pursuant to the requirements of the Planning Act, notice of the statutory public meeting was provided by advertisement in the form of a sign posted on the subject site 20 days in advance of the public meeting. A notice of the public meeting was sent to registered property owners within 120 meters of the subject property. Approximately 125 property owners were notified by mail. At the time of writing of this report, 15 pieces of correspondence had been received in one petition. Since that time, 2 additional pieces of correspondence have been received with respect to the application and are included in the addendum to the report.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Councillor Osanek?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the changes in Phase 2. I was on Planning Committee last June when the first meeting was heard. I'm just disappointed, though, that there's still the entrance to the gas bar off of Catwoods Drive. So is there like a new traffic report that has come out since last June that highlights those changes you said with the Bay Ridge Drive extension? Like, I drive Catwoods Drive. I know I shouldn't, but I do. It's a good shortcut from my daughter's gymnastics. And since we've had the public meeting last June, I now really watch for that. And there's not going to be a left-hand turn lane, is there, on Catwoods Drive as you're going towards Midland Avenue to get into your gas bar, is there?
I can address that. This is the updated report that was prepared, and one of the important things was that it did recommend not only the changes that I mentioned that have already been instituted that will help, but specifically on the access issue. What we've actually been looking at is looking at the possibility of shifting the access to the west as a result of comments by staff in part, and also to provide the appropriate amount of queuing for that left out onto Midland, to address your very comment. The challenge that we've got is we have with a gas bar, we have truck maneuverability considerations that we've got to deal with that are internal to the site. What we're looking at right now, as I said, is shifting it west from the location I've shown on the plan. It hasn't been resubmitted yet. But that is something that we're looking at. And I do have actually an image that, again, I'll present. It's purely conceptual, but it shows the idea of shifting the bus shelter a little bit further west, shifting the access of Catwoods a little bit west. And what that does is it allows for the proper queuing onto Midland to make the left turn, essentially, and helps to alleviate that consideration. The traffic report has been reviewed by staff, as I understand, and we're in the midst of responding to the remaining issues that they've identified. In terms of the issue of access to Catwoods, based on the frontage of this property, it's very difficult not to provide some form of access to Catwoods to make it viable and appropriate from a connectivity perspective. And the traffic report addresses not only safety considerations, but some of the internal movements through the site as well.
I just remember reading or hearing from the people that were here last June, the residents, and some people saying how it just takes them so many minutes to even back out of their driveway. And I can't imagine having to wait, several minutes to back out of my driveway. And I just think as you're going eastbound on Cat Woods, and if somebody wants to turn left to get into this new commercial complex, they're going to be then holding back all the cars. And at rush hour, it is bumper to bumper. And these letters, they say that the new speed humps slow down traffic, but there's just as much traffic now as before, or even more traffic as more of Woodhaven subdivision builds out. And that will just back up traffic even more as people are trying to make the left into the gas bar or the Jiffy Lube or the restaurant, off of Catwoods Drive. So for that, I'm really skeptical. I would like it a lot better if all the access was just off of Midland. Thank you.
If I may as well, I think to the question of queuing into the site as well, just further to your point, that was specifically addressed also in the updated traffic report, and it's available, and it's been, I think, fairly rigorously tested and reviewed and evaluated based on accepted practice. So at the end of the day, the nature of this type of commercial development is that of pass-by natured trips as opposed to destination-related trips. And that's also reflected in the analysis, which helps alleviate the additional traffic. Again, I'm not a traffic engineer, but that's my planning view of it. Thank you.
Sorry, Madam Chair, one more question. People would be able to make a left-hand turn onto Catwoods Drive out at the gas bar, or are they going to have to get onto Midland by turning right onto Midland? Like, are they going to be able to make a left-hand turn onto Catwoods Drive?
It's proposed to be full moves access. So.
Yeah, yeah, because I've seen that also. And, the public warned, restrict left-hand turns, restrict the left-hand turn. We didn't, and now there's accidents, like at the Esso, at Bay Ridge Drive and Highway 2. So, yeah.
Thank you. Other questions? Councillor McLaren?
Thank you. I'm concerned that we already may have zoned too much commercial. I understand that the previous commercial land reviews claimed that we had, and having talked to the consultants who are doing it currently, they have already counted that we may have too much commercial already to 2041. And when Councillor Osanek and I were meeting with them, they had not even counted the soft commercial, the commercial that's already on industrial lands, like employment lands. So it may even be higher than 2041. And that strikes me as being a little unsustainable in the sense that we expect to have perhaps a decreasing or stabilizing population in less than 20 years, and we have more supply already than there seems to be a need for. I'm also concerned about the vibrancy of the downtown. We had a report that came out a few years ago saying that any increases in commercial land outside, zoning outside of the downtown, actually hurts the downtown because people tend to fly out there, and it increases the vibrancy of the downtown. And it also seems to me that, adding more commercial when we already have a surplus, why can't we build what you're proposing in an existingly zoned commercial?
Through you to the question, I think it's important to recognize that this application is implementing the vision that the city established through the designation of these lands. These have been designated for commercial uses through the arterial commercial designation. The introduction of the Phase 2 lands that would consider residential would further the notion of sustainable planning practice, which is encouraging generally mixed use, reducing or consolidating the types of uses that you'd experience, convenience related to the neighborhood. So I think that what we're really doing here is implementing we're not adding commercial lands, rather, we're implementing what has already been designated. And we're doing so in a manner that is as efficient as we can, which also, I believe, supports the overall principles of sustainability. At the end of the day, the uses that we're envisioning here are not those uses that would compete with the downtown type of commercial uses. And actually, what we've discussed with planning staff is we're actually very precise in what uses were permitted, which goes to further, I think, strengthen my comment about these not competing with the downtown type of uses.
Okay, so one of the things you mentioned there was, or earlier to a previous question, was that this is for pass-by trips, and you just mentioned that it seemed to be more for the neighborhood. I submit to you that if it were in fact more for the neighborhood, a more walkable area, it would be less competitive with the downtown. But do you have any connections there with the neighborhood?
So we introduced not only the bus shelter, which I mentioned, but we've introduced sidewalk extending all the way out to Midland, and we're considering the comments by staff of extending that also up Midland, where it doesn't presently exist. My comment about pass-by trips is that by the nature of a gas bar, typically that's the nature of the it's not a destination, but rather it's performing a service in terms of fulfilling that aspect of things. It's more of a comment about the capacity of what traffic would generate based on that use. So.
Now, with regards to that gas bar, it seems we may already have too many of it, and part of the sustainability part of the official plan is that we want to limit car culture. We want to encourage transit, which is great that you have a bus stop there, but we also want to help with walkability. So the adjacent neighborhoods to be able to walk there would be great. But having a gas bar there is also not so helpful for economic development because it actually dilutes the amount of people or the amount of customers for the existing gas bar services, and thereby lowering their disposable income, which is the income that is used to support the other businesses in Kingston. If we dilute the amount of disposable income that any person has or any group of people have, that doesn't help. That creates a vicious cycle of anti-development. So, and it seems to me that most people don't want that particular gas station there also, judging from some of the letters that came in. Is there any way that you would have, say, residential on top of commercial that actually supports the neighborhood as opposed to pass-by trips?
I think through the chair to respond to that, I think with respect to the question of gas station, I think the reality of the market economy that we're in, the proponents that are behind this project are seasoned commercial developers, and they're not in this on a speculative basis. There's a demonstrated need that's been identified here from that standpoint, notwithstanding differing views about what that looks like in terms of automobile gas bars versus other technologies. In terms of, I guess, the question of mixed use, what we're envisioning here is a form of mixed use that integrates residential and commercial. It's quite clear that the nature of this designation in the official plan is not intended to be the neighborhood commercial type of flavor, if you will, the nature of the commercial hierarchy. It was specifically identified to fulfill an arterial type of format. So we, by virtue of the official plan policies, we don't really have the luxury without changing the official plan to do so. Not to say that phase 2 would provide that opportunity. That's why we're securing what we want is a mixed zoning that would allow for that and actually facilitate that. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Neal?
Yeah, yes. I was interested in your comment that this is, your plans are looking at the fact that this is transitional and that it's being incorporated very much within a residential area. And I'm happy to hear that you're already considering the extension of sidewalks and because usually when you do traffic studies, traffic engineers tell you how to move cars around. They don't necessarily tell you how to move people around in the most efficient way. And I'm looking forward to the comprehensive report with recommendations that can reassure people in the neighborhood that this won't be like your typical arterial strip mall that has no consideration for the adjoining residential areas. And with it being mixed use, clearly there will be some neighborhood commercial applications that probably will be on the site. So whatever considerations you can make to enhancing the walkability, the ability for non-vehicles to access the properties as well, I think would be good business and good for the neighborhood. So I look forward to those being included in the final submission. So.
And through you, Madam Chair, we've received comments from staff. We've incorporated some of them. We're not yet finished with the exercise of all the connectivity through the site and around the perimeter. So that's our intention, is to make it, again, an experienced developer with the desire to have high quality projects. So we will be responding to that. So thank you.
Oh, Councillor Turner.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'd like to thank you for your presentation, and I'd like to thank you for all the hard work you've put into this. I'd also like to say it's a different strategy when you look at the West End versus the downtown. In the West End, people drive, and so it's a different strategy, it's a different marketing strategy. So I understand what you're saying about the arterial roads and that we need gas stations, and these things we do need, and we do need commercial places to go and shop. So I think it's a nice plan, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there members of the public who wish to comment on this? Yes, sir, if you'd like to come over to the microphone and give your name and address. And what we'll do is add all the questions together, and we will ask Mr. Gooder to answer everyone at the very end. Okay.
It's on? Sorry. My name's John Michaud. I live on 1142 Bittersweet, which is just off of Catwoods. One of my biggest issues with the traffic, I agree with Madam Chairman there, or Madam, I don't remember what her name was or title is, about the flow of traffic there. It has exceedingly gotten worse in the last couple of months, especially when they've opened up and more people are seeming to find it as a shortcut or as a good thoroughfare. You get a lot more big trucks going through, very noticeable. And we're noticing that especially during rush hours, peak hours, the traffic gets flowing right up, and I've seen it going straight out onto Midland. People trying to turn to get around, especially coming into the Catwoods area. It gets very congested with, again, you got the speed bumps there. You've got a four-way stop not that far down the road. You got an entrance on from Bittersweet, which happens to be the one I'm on. And you got people trying to back out of their parking spots. I keep hearing them referring to the gas bar over on Princess there in Bayshore. There are no houses actually, their driveways right onto the highway there, or right onto the road there. So it does not seem to have that same problem. But when you're trying to get people out, I'm seeing people sitting there for 5 or 6 minutes just waiting for traffic to clear up so they can even pull out, even if they backed in. They're having hard times backing in. Having more traffic, introducing more traffic coming, and especially doing a left-hand turn there in such a short distance from the intersection, I'm questioning how that's going to actually help flow of traffic, and if not impede the traffic. I've only seen the traffic study from February 2014, I'm afraid, And that's why I'm kind of, my main question is, how are they going to expect that to improve, especially with them opening up more subdivisions in that area?
Thank you, and I'll ask Mr. Guter to answer everyone's questions at the very end. So we'll ask other people to make their comments and questions, and then I'll ask him to respond.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Sir?
Madam Chair, members of the Planning Committee, members of the public. My name is Dave Mazer. I'm a resident at 765 Catwoods Drive. I've been so for some 13 years. At the June meeting, June 19th of 2014, I addressed the Planning Committee, and my remarks are on file for your review. Just prior to the approval, just prior to this application being heard on June 19th last year, a developer of a downtown building was seeking planning approval, and during his presentation, he said, and I quote, he wanted to be respectful of what already exists and to work with the adjacent property owners so that his plans did not cause conflict or hardship and fit with the area, with the area's neighbors. The design and use was appropriate for the existing area, and the homeowner said that the developer had listened to the concerns, addressed them, and he had no opposition to the application. This truly reflects a respect for others and for what already exists. It should be the model by which our community and neighborhoods grow. The residents of Catwoods between Midland and Bay Ridge and adjoining streets have not been afforded this same respect. The frustration that is being expressed is not solely about this application as a standalone issue, but is the cumulative effect of many projects and decisions made without consultation of the residents who have been impacted the most by these changes. The changes in traffic volume and land use have added stress and worry about the safety and right to a peaceful existence. We have become the conduit to support growth in areas that are not part of our subdivision. We face a daily convoy of heavy equipment, including dump trucks, concrete trucks, paving equipment, building suppliers, contractors with trailers, all to feed the Woodhaven development and other projects that are not within our subdivision. What was once a mature, quiet little subdivision street has been transformed, into a major artery. We have been told that Catwoods Drive, despite its street type classification, was a mistake. And it is abundantly clear to us who live on it that is so. We see no relief in sight given the size of the Woodhaven development. Add to this the prospect of more construction to build this proposed plaza, and it's easy to see how we are being subjected to unreasonable traffic, noise, and disturbance, and the potential for loss of equity of our residential properties. One has only to look at a few remaining homes on Midland Avenue to see what happens when residential property comes up against commercial property. Unlike those few homes remaining on Midland, our properties on Catwoods are zoned residential, so we cannot convert them to businesses or our business uses as they have on Midland. Our properties on Catwoods, a young resident of Catwoods Drive who legally parked on the street in front of her home because of difficulty getting out of her driveway in heavy traffic was told by a police officer that she was being rude and she should not do so. I asked Planning Committee to consider what it would be like for you and your families if your residents was impacted as ours has been. Would you not want to be assured that your concerns were addressed and all efforts made to find solutions that show respect and minimize the negative changes? I do not believe that those of us who oppose this application as it currently stands are anti-business or anti-development, but simply want to be assured that our concerns will be addressed in this proposal and solutions found that consider and respect existing conditions. This proposal is in its planning stages and can be changed with the click of a mouse. Site plan and locations can be altered. We, however, cannot move our homes. With cooperation and respect from the developer and planning department, solutions can be found. A change to locate the gas bar to the northwest corner of this property and move buildings A and B toward Midland, closer to the Catwoods intersection, would be much safer for residents and minimize congestion at the intersection, as well as respect the existing residential properties. A gas station and a confectionery is not pleasing to the eye and does not reflect the nature of a subdivision. One only needs to look at the gas bar, parking lot, and confectionery at Bay Ridge and Princess to know this is true. I disagree with this property being changed from its current residential zoning. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Do you have a copy of that for the clerk?
Yes.
Would anyone else like to speak to this application? I would ask if any members of the committee have any further questions. And if you would like to respond to some of the points that were raised.
If I may, very briefly, Madam, with respect to, I believe it was John, I'm not pronouncing the last name, but there was comments largely related to the flow of traffic, backing out. I would certainly encourage anyone to read the updated report. If you're basing your comments on the old report, when we met, we had the ability to incorporate everything into that report, and I think it would be appropriate for you to take a look at that. Ultimately, we've reduced the size of phase one, which is going to reduce the traffic volume overall, and the traffic impact study concludes that it's an acceptable level. So I just respond in saying that. The second deputant, Dave Nasir, I've read the correspondence as well, and I think I would point out that there's been over a year of effort into adjustments and consultation outside of the normal Planning Act procedure to hear from residents and work to address them. The evidence of that is actually there have been transportation improvements made from public meeting number 1 till now, as well as the matter of design considerations. We have a very contemporary, attractive design for the gas bar, knowing that they can be almost as attractive as you make them. This is a contemporary design. So we'll work with staff to provide an appropriate design. And again, we believe that we have addressed the issues of compatibility. And again, I would just emphasize this is intended for commercial development by virtue of the official plan. We're implementing that. So thank you.
And if I could just check with staff that all of the new updated reports that we've been hearing about are available on the city website. Is that correct? Or through you, Mr. Gotsis?
Through you, Madam Chair, any updated reports can be obtained by contacting myself.
Thank you. Councillor Neal?
Just quickly, it was brought up by one of the people that referencing a development elsewhere. I want to thank staff because they made available to me, which I shared with some constituents, a Dropbox with all of the current and, as it goes along, updated reports within that Dropbox. And I'm hopeful that that could be made available right across the city anytime we get a more complex application, so that people could indeed access the most current information and reports through a Dropbox kind of approach.
Ms. Vendetti?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. We can definitely do that and make that information available for this file. We need to be contacted and have that information requested so that we can have the Dropbox information pulled together and make it available. But as you've indicated, that information can then be shared once it's provided. So we don't have the ability at this point in time to do that for every single file that we have, but we can definitely do it for select files and provide information upon request.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Rosanek?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the one resident made the comment, and I didn't hear what the answer would be, and that was just maybe changing the order. If where you have B and C, C being Jiffy Lube, B being the restaurant, can B and C be D? And then the gas bar, you know, would be where the restaurant and Jiffy Lube is, and all that space down at the bottom could be the restaurant and Jiffy Lube. You could still have the in and around and the out for the huge gas tanker.
So yes, a fair question. We did look at that with the tenants, and we determined, it was determined that it wasn't feasible to make that shift, in part because of the movements that the gas bar require. Typically, they do prefer corners, and actually the official plan speaks to the preference for corner properties as a result of matters there. So that was examined. The tenants at the north end of the property, there's been expressions of interest, but those are not solidified. And so I guess to the respondent to the question, we've basically more or less solidified the configuration and exhausted the opportunity to shift as you've outlined. So.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I would like to thank you, and I'll close this public meeting. Our next public meeting is application for zoning bylaw amendment 228-230 Brock Street and 122-126 Sydenham Street. And FO10 consultants will be presenting.
Well, thank you and good evening. My name is Jeremy Johnston. I'm a land use planner with FO10 Consultants, and I'm here tonight representing the Brock Sydenham Corporation, the owners of the property at 228 and 230 Brock Street, and that also includes civic addresses 122 to 126 Sydenham Street. The application before you tonight is a zoning bylaw amendment, which would be followed by a consent. Just going to get situated here within the area. The property is located in downtown Kingston. It is within the Central Business District designation, and so it benefits from a lot of the amenities of the area, commercial amenities, and the fact that it's near several employment destinations. Zooming in a bit, the property is located at the corner of Brock and Sydenham Street. I've drawn in the boundaries of 230 and 228 separately, although they are at this time one parcel. As I said, the proposal will be to sever that property after the zoning bylaw amendment is concluded if it's successful, and that will represent the historical lot boundaries. There is a rear lane that abuts the rear of the property, and this is a municipally maintained lane. Getting on street level now, this is looking particularly at 230 Brock Street and shows that there are really two components to this part of the property. There's the historic red brick building that fronts onto Brock Street and bends around the corner, and then there's a building that was added in the 1970s, a more modern addition. And then there's a church further south along Sydenham Street. And I'd also know that this property is close to several heritage properties across the street on Brock Street. Now looking from Brock Street, this just shows both 230 and 228, and that dotted line down the middle shows the historical separation between the two buildings. This is looking down that rear lane I mentioned, and also shows that there's covered parking spaces located in that modern addition. So looking at a conceptual plan which essentially illustrates what exists, there are 3 parking spaces located at the rear of both buildings, and that black line separating 228 from 230 Brock Street is the proposed lot boundary that, as I said, will reflect historical lot boundaries. And just reiterating that this is essentially what exists on the site. And just summarizing, so within the building at 228 Brock Street, it's a 12-unit mixed-use building. The commercial addition was built in the 1970s. There are 8 residential units that are recognized by the city, but as the property existed when it was acquired by the current owner this year, there are actually 10 units that are being operated as residential and 2 units that are being operated as commercial. There are 3 parking spaces which were historically leased to Hotel Dieu employees. 230 Brock Street, there's a ground floor office unit. There are 2 residential units on the 2nd and 3rd floors. And there are as well 3 parking spaces, again, historically have been leased to Hotel Dieu employees. And I also note that in the Downtown Action Plan from 2004, this property is identified as an existing residential building. So what is proposed is essentially to recognize what exists as the owner has acquired it this year. So that is recognizing a total of 12 existing residential units across both buildings. The units range from 1 to 3 bedrooms. There's no change proposed to the exterior of the building. We seek to recognize the existing parking supply. The applicant or the owner is requesting some flexibility on the ground floor. Currently, the ground floor is commercial, and it is proposed that it would be flexible to be used as residential if in the future that was desired. There is 1 second-story office unit remaining that is proposed to be converted for residential purposes, as it has been challenging, I understand, to occupy that unit for commercial purposes. And again, just after the zoning bylaw amendment is concluded, if successful, the applicant seeks to return the property to its historical lot boundaries. Just looking briefly at the official plan, it is within the Central Business District. This is a residential intensification in an appropriate location by my analysis. It's on an arterial road in close proximity to commercial uses as well as open space. There is a schedule within the official plan that shows streets that have mandatory commercial frontage, and this property is not one of them. Looking at the zoning bylaw, the current zoning is for neighborhood commercial C1-1. When we considered this proposal, we've identified a provision within the zoning bylaw that permits conversions of commercial buildings for residential purposes, and we believe this is generally applicable here. So we're requesting an increased density to recognize the existing units, to permit commercial or residential on the ground floor, to recognize the existing parking and amenity area. Just looking at supporting works, a planning justification report was prepared for this application, as well as a servicing assessment, which did not identify any issues related to servicing. So in summary, no exterior changes are proposed. Essentially, this application seeks to recognize what exists while permitting a bit more flexibility on the ground floor, as well as permitting the conversion of a 2nd floor office unit. We believe it's consistent with the objectives of the official plan, and the building will be appropriately controlled through the proposed zoning bylaw. So that concludes my presentation, and I welcome your questions or comments.
Thank you. And could we hear from staff, please? Mr. Leary?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're happy to report that the proper notice has been given for this application as required by the Planning Act, both in the form of a sign posted on the property, as well as first-class mail to all residents within 14 120 meters, 400 feet of this property, which constituted about 47 property owners, and as well as a courtesy notice was given in the Kingston Week Standard. To date, no written comments have been received. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, are there members of the public who would like to speak to this application? Seeing none, I would like to thank you very much for attending. And that will close this public meeting. And our next public meeting is application for draft plan of subdivision, official plan amendment, and zoning bylaw amendment, 50 Macaulay Street, 80 Daly Street, 199 Wilson Street, applicant Corporation of the City of Kingston. And Mr. Keane will be presenting.
Well, good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee, staff, and members of the public that remain this evening. My name is Mike Keane, and I'm a land use planner with Foten Consultants, and I have been retained by the Housing Department of the city to assist with this exciting project. And this project involves an official plan amendment, a zoning bylaw amendment, as well as a plan of subdivision. So looking in on this development, which is more broadly known as the Shannon Park redevelopment, it's in the Rideau Heights community. And thanks to my colleague Jeremy, who assists with presentations, you can see kind of a 500-meter radius around the site that generally gets the site fairly close to the commercial development that exists on Division Street, and it would extend to Montreal Street on the east. Moving in closer on this site, you can see the blocks identified as the former 80 Daly Street residential development that's been removed. And actually, just as of this morning when I drove by, the last bits of the Wally Almer Arena were being removed. Possibly the slab still exists. The Rideau Heights Public School and the block that the city is working on, the future community center as well. Moving in on the pictures, this picture is looking to the east through a parking lot that exists on Wilson Street, and in the distance is the former Wally Almer building. This building is actually looking zoomed out from that parking lot where that picture was taken. So this is an existing parking lot for access to the park. And this picture is looking now from the cul-de-sac that is in front of the school, and it is looking into the park kind of in the opposite direction where my former picture was from. This picture, which doesn't look like it shows much, the reason for showing this picture is just to show you, you can kind of see the soccer pitch in the distance, and what it shows is the block that is being proposed as the new residential block as part of this development. And the homes in the background of this image are the homes on Jean Worrell Crescent. This is the excavation work that's basically smoothed out now if you drive by the site from the former 80 Daly Street buildings. And this picture is the city's approved redevelopment for the park. This is really forming the basis for where our work begins at this project. So this is long established city approval with the community center and conceptually the park redevelopment that's proposed along with the road. So as I mentioned, there's 3 applications before the committee this evening, and they all work together to help visualize and envision this final redevelopment for the park. So looking at the draft plan of subdivision, which is very traditional, there's a number of blocks being established. and it's probably easiest if I show you my next picture, which colors it in. So you can see that the former Wally Elmer building, as well as the 80 Daly Street housing, will now become part of the park. The street will be established to run through the development, and then the soccer pitch is really where the new housing block is proposed. The subdivision itself is not proposing to subdivide the housing block. The proposal is simply to create a block that can eventually be sold by the city to a developer, or should the city choose not to develop the housing block, we've established zoning that would allow a park use to continue at that location. But as part of the exercise, we did 2 concept plans to try to see what type of housing could fit onto a site like this. So what we've proposed is ranging from single detached to a maximum of a stacked townhouse format of development. And some of the instructions that we received through city staff, as well as through consultation that occurred as part of the redevelopment process, was to not have driveways on this new street. So a lot of the zoning that we've established, not a lot of, all of the zoning that we've established, helps to ensure that the housing that's developed will be focused on the new street, and that whether it be parking lots or rear garages, the actual drivability of the site will occur from the rear. So in this concept that you see, this is basically what I would call the lowest density concept. This is showing 27 townhome type blocks, all with frontage on Macaulay. And, principle here being bring the eyes to the street, help to have some oversight over the park. And, we think that it's possible that that type of development probably wouldn't occur by a developer because it just won't quite maximize the use of the land. So we also tried to work on some other concepts that might also show what could work under the zoning that we've proposed. And the best way to think of what you see before you would be I'm trying to think of what off of John Counter Boulevard and Montreal Street, there's a set of condominiums that have private lanes that access them. Now this would be much smaller scale, but it gives you the idea where the houses still will front on Macaulay Street. Those row houses would have rear garages, almost like a reverse townhouse. And then you could have traditional row houses or semi-detached on a private drive, just to increase the density of the development. You'll note in both concepts that there is a substantial buffer with the residents on Jean Worrell Crescent. So just looking briefly at the official plan, you can see that right now the residential is the yellow, which is where the Daly Street was located, and the rest is park. And what we're proposing is basically a flip of that designation. So bring that former housing and the former community center into the park and move the residential to where the soccer pitch is currently located. Looking at the current zoning, you can see the long-standing park zoning. The B2 is a higher medium density type of zoning that exists there today, as well as the special P1 zone for the old arena. Moving forward, what we would propose is to bring all the park into that same consistent use that exists today, and then place special zoning on the residential block to help meet some of those goals and visions that were foreseen by staff as well as by the community. So I'm not going to get into the detail of the zoning, but I have a number of slides if anyone wanted to view those tonight. But simply put, you can see that what we're proposing as permitted uses ranges from single detached houses to stacked town houses being the most dense form of use. moving to a couple of slides. This one I just want to bring to the committee's attention that we are specifically adding a land use buffer strip that would see a 6-meter wide buffer that couldn't be driven on. It's meant for landscaping, open space that would abut the residents at Jean Worrell Crescent. And as already has been a discussion tonight, we're more broadly proposing that secondary residential units be something that is permitted on this site. And the rest of the provisions you can see, I've got pages and pages of detailed provisions to help ensure that when the city sells this land to a developer, if that's the city's choice, there will be quite extensive provisions and regulation so that the development that ends up being built will be somewhat close to the concepts that we believe fit for this project. So in terms of the zoning, as I noted, it's designed to hit a maximum of a stacked townhouse type dwelling. We've looked at existing zones within Kingston, and it largely does reflect the zoning that city staff are familiar with in Cat Woods. We also looked at some more progressive zoning in the GTA, as well as some other local type zonings in Brockville to kind of combine these together to try to make something work for this site. And the focus being, have small front yards so that the buildings are located close to the street, and make sure the vehicle access is not through your traditional garage at the front of the house, so that we're really trying to maintain that park look and then ultimately access off this extended Macaulay Street into the rear of the property. And, looking at some of the reasons that we proposed the residential secondary units is because the shape of the parcel that we were left with to develop this draft plan is kind of an odd shape. It doesn't work out perfectly. So as a way to increase density and flexibility, we felt that secondary suites would be appropriate at this location. And as noted already, the park use would still remain permitted should housing not occur on this site. And the increase in height that we proposed is just really at a height to limit the what you could do to townhouses as opposed to small apartment buildings. And intentionally reducing the front yard to bring the buildings close to the street to help frame this new park. And then ultimately there's an increase in a rear yard in the event of when there are rear garages, so that there's enough space to still have some green space between the garage and the house. Through this application, we did produce a planning report, servicing report, archaeology report, and since submission, the tree inventory has also been completed, which is more to assist park staff as they advance this application and their aspects of it. And so really what I'd like to summarize for you tonight is that what we're trying to achieve here is improvements to Shannon Park. It's presently a park that has been what I would classify as a backyard park. It really has very few people fronting on it. And so by opening up Daly Street, you now have eyes that can get in from Daly Street. By putting a street through the park, we're opening up the activity in the park. The new housing will be specifically designed to have eyes on that park as well. And so the overall goal here is what we believe to be a major improvement to the park overall, while still allowing the city to have some gains and allow some new housing to materialize. So ultimately, the three applications, which we do believe provide this context-sensitive medium-density housing, will be consistent with the provincial policy statement and broadly with the objectives of the official plan. And I'm pleased to entertain any questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lambert?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, notice of the public meeting has been provided in accordance with the Planning Act. A notice of public meeting has been posted at the subject site 20 days in advance of the meeting. As well, a notice has been mailed to all property owners within 120 meters of the site. This involved approximately 100 mailings. In addition, a courtesy notice was published in the local newspaper. To date, staff have received one piece of correspondence with respect to the applications, which is enclosed as part of the addendum to this evening's agenda. Comments received will be addressed in a future comprehensive report to be presented for the committee's consideration at a future meeting. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Councillor Osanek.
Through you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Keane, we have the one public comment, and that's about that they wanted a landscape buffer between their crescent and the development. So when you just said that there's going to be a 6-meter wide buffer, that basically satisfies their concern?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. I attended some of the earlier consultations before we were retained, just to kind of see what I might be getting myself into, to be quite honest. And so I could understand that the folks on Jean Worrell were really feeling the loss of a view of the park that they've had for many years. And so when we worked with staff, it was one of these things that we knew right from the beginning. We were somehow, through zoning, going to establish a buffer with those residents, and that's been done, as I pointed out in the zoning. Thank you.
Councillor McLaren.
May I ask if there's any density or sufficient density to justify transit? I believe that's 37.5 units per hectare.
Well, through you, Madam Chair, there is transit in the area, and I don't know if it's been decided if a bus will actually come down this new proposed Macaulay Street, but certainly there is transit right in the area, so in the event that there's not immediate transit, they're not far to a bus stop. I'm not sure, am I misunderstanding you maybe?
I'm just curious what the density, the maximum density that you could get from that.
Well, I suppose the site is 8 hectares. It's 8.5 hectares. It's 20 acres. You know what? I think rather than guess, I'm going to have to just sit down and calculate it and let you know, because I'm not sure that we actually provided like a maximum density in our proposed zoning. So it really depends on if somebody actually visualizes secondary suites, then, this development, which proposes 35 townhouse units, if every single one of those 35 had a secondary suite, you'd actually have 70 homes. But, I don't know that that's necessarily the realistic density either, because it probably ultimately depends on what a developer tries to do. But I'm happy to try to calculate out a few numbers and provide those to you.
No worries. Did you just say it was 8.5 hectares, this parcel?
Yes, the entire parcel of land, the park,
okay.
Including Old Daly Street, including the whole entire project. We're focused on the residential, but the 8.45 hectares is everything.
And I think our commissioner has a comment.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. This is obviously a project that's been led by the two departments, Housing, Social Services, as well as Recreation and Leisure. And right now, currently, the bus does go by on Weller Avenue. And I'm not sure about the densities themselves, but one of the things we are going to look at is with obviously the new community center in place there, which currently, for those of you who are not familiar, Macaulay Street ends just next to or right behind the old arena, which has been demolished. But that street is actually going to come through, and one of the things we are going to look at is not just the residential, but we will be looking at access for the community center and the library that are going to be there. So it's going to be very important to look at how the bus is going to pick up and drop off people in terms of access to those amenities as well, which of course individuals that do reside on that street will be able to access as well.
Other questions? I'd like to open the floor to any members of the public who have questions or comments. We have a microphone to the left and to the right. Seeing no comments? Any other questions from the committee? Then I'd like to thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
And I'll close this public meeting. Our next public meeting is application for official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, Williamsville Main Street. Again, applicant, the Corporation of the City of Kingston, and Ms. Bolton will be presenting.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and ladies and gentlemen. We're here tonight to present a city-initiated amendment to both the official plan and to zoning bylaw 8499, specifically with respect to the Williamsville Main Street. There are a couple of amendments. One set of amendments are related to the inclusion of a temporary use for the Main Street area. The other are a couple of administrative amendments that we're proposing along with the temporary use. The first set of amendments I'm going to look at are to the official plan. And one of the administrative changes we want to make is a correction to the schedule in the official plan for the Williamsville Main Street. This is a copy of Schedule PS1 for the Williamsville Main Street. And when the amendments were done originally in 2013 to implement the Williamsville Main Street study, there were two boundaries. There was the special policy area boundary for the official plan, and then there was the C4 zone, the new zone, for zoning bylaw 8499 for the Williamsville Main Street. And the boundaries of the two were different, and they were intended to be different because the zoning had to take into consideration existing site-specific zones, as well as a couple of existing low to medium density residential areas. What happened was that the zoning boundary got overlaid onto the official plan schedule, so we are proposing at this time to correct that error. What you see on the map, the thicker outer black boundary is the correct official plan boundary for the Williamsville Main Street, and the area that's shaded with the black cross hatching is the existing C4 zone, but that's what was overlaid on to Schedule PS1 for the official plan. So there are just a few pockets you can see scattered around on the perimeter of the area that need to be added in, and the boundary would then correctly identify what was the Williamsville Main Street through the study that was done for the area. So that's the first administrative correction to be made through the amendment. The other change for the official plan involves a change to the text, specifically with respect to private surface parking facilities. And what you show here is both the existing text and the text changes shown that are underlined. And essentially, currently, private surface parking facilities are not a permitted use within the Williamsville Main Street. The change that is being proposed is that they will not be permitted as the primary long-term use of the property, but that a private surface parking facility may be permitted as a short-term temporary use, subject to a temporary use bylaw and a site plan control agreement. And this is to address some of the ongoing issues with requests for off-site parking for development applications, and will also provide the city with the time that it needs to undertake a parking strategy for the area. So this is the change to the official plan that would permit that temporary use. There's a corresponding change to zoning bylaw 8499 to add that temporary use. So it would be in addition to the C4 zone, which is the C4 zone for the Williamsville Main Street. It would permit a surface parking facility as a temporary use in the Williamsville Main Street, and a temporary use as defined by the Planning Act has a limit of 3 years. There is the opportunity to renew that, but there has to be another temporary use bylaw passed by council. So it can never be longer than a 3-year period unless it is renewed and approved by council. So this additional temporary use provision would apply to all of the sites within the C4 zone, but individual properties wanting to have this use would still be required to apply to the city for a site plan approval for the specific site in question. Other uses, there are a couple of other administrative amendments being proposed for the C4 zone for Williamsville. One is just a correction of a numbering error in section 23C for the C4 zone. The other is to include a reference to the C4 zone in the parking provision section of the bylaw. So currently, the C4 zone makes a reference to the parking provisions in section 5 of the bylaw, but section 5 of the bylaw does not make a corresponding cross-reference back to the C4 zone. So we just want to make that addition as well. In terms of public notice for the proposed amendments, notice was given in accordance with the Planning Act. There was a full advertisement in the Whig Standard on July 14th. In addition to that, we did undertake a mail-out notice as well to all property owners within the Williamsville Main Street and within 120 meters from the Main Street, which was just over 950 notices. And there was the courtesy notice in the Whig Standard about the public meeting here tonight with the committee. Currently, there have been 2 telephone inquiries requesting more information about the amendments, but currently no written comments have been received. Certainly, any of the comments that we do get, we will address in the comprehensive report that we will bring back to the committee at a future meeting date. And I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Councillor Neal.
Yes. First, I want to thank staff for kind of giving me a heads up about this and helping to walk me through this originally. I appreciate the temporary nature of this, 3 years, and I understand it can be renewed for another 2 or 3 years, but probably at that time it's no longer temporary. So we would need to review this as a permanent zoning change if we needed to at that time. I just, as the district councillor, I'd be looking for some assurances that, because I totally support the idea of first floor commercial and the business district not having the surface parking that's somewhat ugly along the entranceway to the downtown. Will we, as I understand it, will have full rights of site plan for even these temporary rezonings, so that we'll be able to, through wall or through controlling the entrance, hopefully not off of Princess Street, and doing some kind of landscaping that will make it less than just a concrete pad on the main street?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that's correct. All the sites within the area would be subject to site plan control, and we would certainly review issues such as access and landscaping buffers through that process.
Great. And I also, as I understand it, the first floor commercial is the main kind of commitment that we've made to the Main Street study. If somebody, although we always talk about first floor commercial with residential above, but somebody could build, conceivably, a first floor commercial with a couple of floors of parking above, if it was commercially viable. Is that accurate?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that's correct. It's the ground floor frontage on Princess Street that would be required to have commercial uses where it's required through the official plan.
And I believe Ms. Vendetti was waving at me.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Just to answer your questions about the temporary zoning and how that works. Under the Planning Act, we can pass a temporary zoning bylaw for up to 3 years. The Planning Act allows for an extension of that 3-year time frame by an additional 2 years, but we still have to go through a process, and council would have to approve that extension. What staff are looking at is we are going to be bringing forward a parking strategy for the area in the shorter term, so we're hoping to have that in place as soon as possible within that 5-year period or 3-year period, depending on how that works out. But the temporary zone gives us the flexibility to actually be able to accommodate some of the interests in the area right now, but come up with a longer term strategy to actually address how we want to unfold in that area with respect to parking.
Great. And finally, I appreciate, and I did send an email to our Director of Planning with this question. Within that parking review, will we have an opportunity to do what many municipalities have done, which is similar to payment in lieu of parkland? We can do a payment in lieu of parking, which would create some funding for us to do an appropriate permanent parking fixture behind but not on Princess Street. Is that accurate?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. So part of the strategy that the planning team is working on right now in collaboration with the transportation group is a parking study that looks at an appropriate ratio in terms of the parking requirement. And we had a council report that came about a year ago with a study from Triple N Group that was looking at an appropriate ratio for the area, and also an overall discussion and strategy with respect to cash in lieu and parking. So what we're attempting to do is to bring this forward in harmony with one another. So we have some of the flexibility that's introduced by way of the amendments that we're proposing tonight in terms of a short to medium solution to be able to provide some surface parking in the area that, again, is tempered through appropriate design, landscaping, buffering, so that it's attractive and it's not a blight on the area, while at the same time bringing in the strategy that will have the parking ratio that we want to implement in combination with the cash in lieu program, so that while the city is starting to take cash in lieu in an expanded area and at a greater cost than what we have before, we also have the strategy in place to look at how the municipality can acquire land and be working in partnerships to be providing a sufficient municipal parking supply throughout Williamsville and the downtown area.
And design is great. There are some communities that have developed parking garages that look anything but like their parking garages. So architectural design would be really good to recognize within this. So, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? And are there any questions from the members of the public? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation. And that closes this public meeting. And since we do not have a report, the next report is going to be rescinded. So we're not having this, the last public meeting.
I'm sorry, did we need a motion to actually do that?
We'll do it once the agenda.
Yes, in the business portion.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I'll go through the opening of the regular planning committee meeting and call the meeting to order. Approval of the agenda, please. Moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Turner. All those in favor? And confirmation of the minutes of June the 18th. Moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Turner. All those, any errors or omissions? Nope. All those in favor? Thank you. And the minutes of July the 2nd. Approval of this second group of minutes. Mover and a seconder? Councillor Osanek and Councillor Neal. Any errors or omissions in these? Okay. All those in favor? And that's carried. Disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, there are no delegations, no briefings. And now, if you would like to present your motion, please. Councillor McLaren?
amendment parking for low-density A-type zoning report, PC-15-097, be deferred to a subsequent planning committee meeting to provide additional information.
And that's seconded by Councillor Neal. Comment?
Just briefly, I did receive an email from a constituent. I know that this was originally, I believe, going to be a motion at the same time as, since we're back to 2 meetings in September and we've postponed this, so clearly it wasn't tremendously time sensitive. Is it possible that we can have some assurance that we'll have a public meeting early in September and that the recommendation could come back later in September? So we aren't fighting the why are we doing a public meeting and then instantly voting on a recommendation right afterwards. I always, as you know, have some reluctance about that unless there's a really compelling reason to do so.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm sure that's something that's manageable. We are looking at the first meeting of September for the public meeting. There were some provisions of the parking that we wanted to make sure that were tied down, that were overlooked in the preparation of the bylaw, just so we had the best care and control, not only in terms of what the parking requirement would be, but also the locational criteria. So that's the essence of what we want to capture, and just tweaking that amendment further. We'll have the public meeting, the first meeting in September is what we're aiming for, and then the comprehensive to come to the subsequent planning committee, so long as there's no major concerns that are identified.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
If there are no other questions or comments, I will call the question of deferral. All those in favor? Thank you, and that's carried. Item B is comprehensive report application for zoning bylaw amendment 105 Clergy Street. And there is a recommendation from staff. We have a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Councillor Turner. Any questions? I will call the question. All those in favor? And that's approved. Thank you. And item C is comprehensive report application for zoning bylaw amendment 14 Garrett Street. And again, there is a recommendation from staff. Is there a mover? Councillor Osanek, Councillor Neal, seconds. Questions? All those in favor? Thank you, and that passes. And that's it for the meeting. Yes, there are no motions, notices of motions, other business, and Councillor Neal moves adjournment. Seconded by Councillor Turner. All those in favor? Thank you. Meeting adjourned.